This was an extraordinary operation, and I think this raid will go down in military history. These relatively sophisticated S-300 air defense systems were not at all effective in protecting Venezuela.
That's Mark Cancian of CSIS. We talked to him about the Venezuelan situation on The Breakout. I'm Aaron Mehta. Welcome to The Breakout. Over the weekend, the U.S. conducted an extraordinary military strike in Venezuela. We're joined now by Mark Cancian of CSIS to discuss what went down. Mark, I think the first place to start is to acknowledge just how extraordinary this situation actually is, and the fact that the operation seemed to go off without a hitch. What's your takeaway?
This was an extraordinary operation, and I think this raid will go down in military history as one of the great raids of all time. The president, of course, was effusive in his praise. Now, the president tends to exaggerate, but in this case, I think he was absolutely right. The operation was extremely complex, as you note, 150 aircraft from all the different services, all coming together on a demanding timeline, getting through the Venezuelan air defenses, which were, at least on paper, quite formidable, getting onto the ground, paralyzing Venezuela's response efforts, and then getting through Maduro's Cuban bodyguards to snatch him before he can get into the safe room. The whole thing was quite extraordinary, something that no other country in the world could pull off except possibly Israel and some other circumstances.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the capabilities that seem to be brought to bear here. We heard Kane mention specifically cybercom and spacecom as kind of preparing the way as the helicopters were approaching Venezuela. What's your sense of what went on there, and what are the takeaways that you're looking at?
There's a lot of question about what cybercom's contribution was. There's been talk about parts of Venezuela going dark. I think that is partly a literal observation, but I think it's also about the Venezuelan command and control, because clearly they were paralyzed. They did not react at all. And cybercom may have had a piece of that. U.S. overhead surveillance has been very important, along with CIA assets on the ground. We knew exactly where Maduro was, when he was going to be there, what the routines are of the armed forces, so that the United States could get in there without any losses.
The air defenses is something you mentioned. Obviously, Russian air defenses have a reputation that's taken a bit of a hit over the last couple of years, whether because of Iran or what we've seen even in Ukraine. But to your point, it almost seems like these air defenses weren't even activated. Is your takeaway that this says something about the Russian systems, about Venezuela's command and control, or does it come down to, again, perhaps that cybercom role having taken them off the board before they could come into play?
I think there were a couple of things coming together, but the bottom line was these relatively sophisticated S-300 air defense systems were not at all effective in protecting Venezuela. And the air defenses weren't just these S-300s. They had some of the old 125 systems. They had short-range defense systems, hundreds of them, something over 400 anti-aircraft guns, all concentrated around Caracas. So that, on paper, was quite formidable. The United States probably took them out several ways. Cyber might have been one piece of it. The United States, of course, has anti-radiation missiles to take out the radars themselves. We certainly used some missiles to take out the air defense facilities, flares, chaff, self-defense systems. Those also probably played a role. But the bottom line was that these systems could not face a high-level air attack, such as the United States come out and that the Israelis come out.
So in that case, do you look at this and say, hey, this shows that Russian systems simply aren't at the level that maybe we thought they were? I know the S-300 is the older version of the S-400, which is much ballyhooed. But are there actually takeaways here, or do you think this is, again, older systems versus the highest end adversary they could meet up with? This was probably inevitable.
I think the fact that it's now happened twice with Iran and now with Venezuela is more convincing that it's not just the fact that the local troops might not have been well trained on their uses, but that there's something fundamental about these systems that the United States and its allies are able to overcome.
There will be more of this interview after the break.
At Leonardo DRS, our agility helps bring the ability to dominate in any scenario, on any platform, helping our warfighters accomplish the mission and get home safely. Leonardo DRS, our agility, your advantage.
Are there lessons to be learned from this, whether that's other nations looking at the US and saying, hey, this is how they pulled this off, this is the kind of thing we didn't think they'd be able to execute? Is it something where the US looks at this and says, hey, we have to take lessons from the fact that we were able to execute this way and change how we're doing things, make sure it spreads throughout the force?
I would start by noting that this success is in contrast to some previous failures. If you go back to 1980, the United States tried to rescue the hostages in Iran. That failed spectacularly. And that was one of the impetuses that got Special Operations Command established. In 2003, the United States tried to take out Saddam and some of the high-value targets. That was not very successful either. The kill chain was just too long, too slow. We've been able to overcome that now. In terms of what other countries might take away from this, one response will likely be what we saw after Desert Storm, which is, oh my God, what the Americans can do is really pretty extraordinary. In Desert Storm, we crushed what was the fourth largest army in the world, in 100 hours. Here, we went and snatched the head of an adversary government in their capital. So I think many countries are going to be looking at this and saying, the United States is as formidable a military power as we may have feared. Many of them will also try to emulate that. It's taken us decades to do that. And I would point out to the Chinese that you don't have the hardware or the software to pull this off. So don't even think about doing this on Taiwan.
I guess that's the question then. Are we confident that China or Russia doesn't have these capabilities? And with Russia, I'd point out there were attempts, certainly at the start of the Ukraine war, to decapitate Kiev that were not successful.
There were reports that there were assassination teams in Kiev going after the leadership. Those failed, despite the fact that Russia had been thinking about this for quite some time and is very closely related to Ukraine. And for the Chinese, they're trying to develop these capabilities. They're moving in the direction of more joint operations. But just as it took us decades to hone those skills, it will take them decades. And what they're facing with Taiwan is a more formidable challenge. That is, the Taiwanese have much stronger armed forces than the Venezuelans did, and the reach would have to be a lot longer. And the Chinese capabilities, although very substantial, are not what the United States has. So I hope that the Chinese military leadership is telling its civilian leadership, don't think about trying to do this. And the reason I mention all that is that there's a lot of chatter in China and in the Western Pacific, that the Chinese might get this idea that they could pull this off.
Let's talk about the long-term impacts of apparently having a military force in the region to coerce Venezuela's behavior, which seems to be based on statements from administration officials. But the plan is here to basically say to the government, you're going to run things the way we say we will. If you don't, we're going to come back in with the military. President Trump even brought up the idea of boots on the ground being okay with him. So how does this impact the military posture for the Pentagon? We're going to suddenly have to have, certainly it seems like a larger force in the region, if nothing else.
Let me give two answers, a near-term and a long-term answer. In the near term, I think that the plan sketched out by the president and his senior staff is unworkable. The idea that we are going to give direction to Rodriguez, the acting president, and the Maduro regime will carry those directions out, I don't think it will happen. They will not be willing to make the changes that we direct. For example, cutting off support from Cuba, which provides much of their intelligence capabilities. And the bodyguards for Maduro were all Cuban. So I don't think that they'll be willing to make those changes. I think it'll take a while before that's apparent. And I think the United States will launch a follow-on strike. Longer term, the question is whether the United States posture in the region will be at a higher level than it has been in the past. Well, I think it's certainly true that it'll be at a higher level, because in the past it's been at a very low level, at least since the end of the Cold War.
Right.
We're rebuilding some bases like Roosevelt Roads, for example. What that level is, though, will be very important. Many of us are waiting for the National Defense Strategy to come out to maybe give us some sense about what that level is. Right now, the Navy has about a dozen ships in the region. Even if the Ford goes back to Norfolk, there'll be maybe 8 or 9. Is that going to be a permanent level? And as some ships leave, other ships replace them. That'll put a strain on the naval forces. There are also aviation forces that now are stationed in Puerto Rico, for example, and El Salvador. Will those continue?
Mark Cancian of CSIS, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the program.
And thank you at home for joining us. Obviously, an extraordinary situation that we'll continue to monitor. Make sure to like and subscribe to The Breakout to get it delivered directly to you. We also are on podcasts and your favorite provider. I'm Aaron Mehta. Thanks for watching.